Hello lovelies, in this video we're going through the top 30 quotes that are in Macbeth. Now, what I want you to do is think about who said what, why they said it, who they were saying it to, and then what the impact of that was. If you include all of this in your essays, in your exam answers, then they're really going to level up your work.
Sometimes it can be hard to know where you want to gear your revision, especially when you're exploring the play character by character. In this video, I'm going to analyse 10 of my favourite juicy quotations spoken by Macbeth, just to give you a head start with your revision. I've tried to select ones that aren't as typical or as obvious as "is this a dagger?" because it's so easy to remember anyway, and hopefully these are a little more original for you. You can also watch the ways that I annotate these quotations and apply this skill to your annotations of others you like and others you already remember well. Essentially, I want to make it clear that you don't have to stick to these quotations rigidly. You might have other quotations that you know you can say lots about. So, I'm going to explore them in chronological order so that you can see any developments in character and see if you can draw any links between quotations as well, because that's a really brilliant skill to have for your essays too. Now, this quotation that you can see here are the very first words spoken by Macbeth on stage. It seems silly to ignore this, as it's clearly a significant moment in the play, and Shakespeare has clearly thought carefully about the first words his tragic hero says. He's with Banquo following his success in battle, and is just about to meet the witches, unbeknownst to him. So Macbeth says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen," and in a literal sense Macbeth just states that the weather is unnaturally foul, but he also recognises the fact that the day is fair, as Scotland are now victorious in battle, and fair here means good, essentially. However, if we look deeper, it seems to reflect an inner conflict and confusion. He doesn't know how to feel, he seems overwhelmed, particularly emphasised by the fact he has never seen anything like this before. What he is seeing, he has never seen anything like it before. This ultimately foreshadows his inner conflict later, deciding whether to go ahead and pursue his ambition and power or kill King Duncan. Further to this, the fact that the weather is unnaturally foul sets the tone for an ultimately tumultuous narrative, but he is unable to recognise this in the moments to come. Rather than doubt the witches, he is completely intrigued by their offerings. More interesting still, these words you'll have noticed are very similar to that of the witches in Act 1, Scene 1, with their paradoxical statement, "fair is foul and foul is fair." Therefore, Shakespeare is clearly exposing the influence they will have on him, and the fact that his entanglement with the supernatural is imminent. Or, on the other hand, perhaps he is foreshadowing Macbeth's capability for evil. If his words are similar to that of fiendish forces like witches, perhaps this should act as a warning or clue to the audience that he isn't the noble, brave and worthy gentleman we heard he was in Act 1, Scene 2. Okay, moving on to our second quotation, we've got "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires," from Act 1, Scene 4. So a little bit about where this one comes from. Macbeth has already seen the witches at this point, and has been given the title of Thane of Cawdor too, so he's really starting to believe the witches' prophecies. However, he has just heard that Malcolm, King Duncan's son, receives the title of Prince of Cumberland, and that in other words just means the next King of Scotland. So whilst one prophecy appears to have come true with him becoming Thane of Cawdor, it seems impossible in this moment that he will naturally become king. Therefore, this quote reveals Macbeth's inner conflict and his desire to conceal his dark ambitions. It symbolises his wish to hide his intentions from both the world and even himself. The imagery of light and darkness play a crucial role here. If light is symbolic of goodness and purity, and darkness symbolic of evil and concealment, this motif mirrors the public perception of Macbeth as a valiant hero despite his dark, concealed intentions. Looking more closely at some of the words as well, we have words that are pluralised, stars and desires, which is suggestive of the fact that his desires, and there seem to be multiple now, are so intense that all stars must be hidden, so there is absolutely no light shed on his intentions. And in the book of Genesis, there are 7 days of creation by God. The first thing God did was separate the light from dark, introducing light. Macbeth, in a sense, becomes an inversion of this creation. If all things light and living came originally from darkness, Macbeth here represents all things black and evil, as he does not wish to emerge from this darkness, and rather, his evil desires can stay protected and hidden there. Finally, the fact that his desires are deep is suggestive of the fact that they are entrenched within him and intensely felt. It is now not something he can easily shake off. These desires are embedded and fixed in his psyche. Next up, we have this quote here. We still have judgment here that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor, from Act 1, Scene 7. So in this soliloquy from Act 1, Scene 7, Macbeth actually almost talks himself out of murdering Duncan. He lists reasons why he thinks it's immoral, including the fact that Duncan is loved by all and actually trusts Macbeth to protect him. Here specifically, he is saying that by committing evil deeds yourself, you only encourage violence elsewhere and it will come back to bite you. He recognises the consequences of immorality here. Now, this awareness of even-handed justice serves as a reminder of the biblical principle of reaping what you sow. Now, this is from Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. And then you have the phrase bloody instructions, which is a euphemism for murder. And a euphemism is a phrase where you avoid saying something that might offend someone, so you say it in a different way where it's more carefully put so you don't upset someone. But this is a soliloquy, so there's no one listening. He's saying this to himself. So it's almost as if he doesn't want to accept that reality of murder and regicide. So clearly it hints at a clear discomfort with not just the word, but the act itself. Furthermore, he talks of violent acts coming back to plague the inventor. A plague is of course a widespread disease, and so metaphorically this exposes regicide as a widespread disease that will not only affect Macbeth's conscience, but will plague Scotland with turmoil too. This plague, and he seems fully aware of this here, will lead to his downfall. This symbolically serves as yet another warning to the audience about the consequences of regicide. Overall, this language clearly exposes Macbeth's deep-seated unease and foreshadows the consequences he and the rest of Scotland will be subjected to. So you can see here that Macbeth is aware of the risks of their machinations, or their plans in other words, yet he is bound by his vaulting ambition, and so is of course easily talked back into the deed when Lady Macbeth manipulates him following this very soliloquy. In this quotation, Macbeth reveals his growing instability. This comes during the soliloquy just before he is about to commit regicide. He hallucinates a dagger, arguably a manifestation of his guilt and a symbol of the instability he will experience mentally. So he says, "Art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain?" in Act 2, Scene 1. Don't forget, he is a man about to commit an act so sinful it's almost as if God is warning him of the consequences of transgressing the divine order. Now, if we look at the language, he actually has to challenge and question himself to ensure he can keep hold of his sanity. This hallucination, coming from what Macbeth thinks is a fever or a heat-oppressed brain, metaphorically aligns Macbeth's murderous intentions with physical sickness. It seems as if Shakespeare is suggesting that his moral descent has led to his mental descent. He will no longer experience peace anymore. His crimes are already affecting him in a tangible way, with the word heat being a visceral image, one that we can feel. This foreshadows his permanent suffering and damnation that he will experience following the murder. Shakespeare is warning of the inescapable consequences of regicide, both physical and mental. This quotation is from Act 2, Scene 2, and Macbeth says, "I had most need of blessing and amen stuck in my throat." So this is immediately following the murder, and he immediately recognises his own damnation too. He is visibly panicked and remorseful, especially considering he hears voices telling him Macbeth shall sleep no more, along with the fact he finds himself unable to pray specifically here. This quotation ultimately illustrates his mental turmoil and the powerful influence of his ambition and guilt. Macbeth tells Lady Macbeth of the prayers he hears from the two anonymous voices, and his inability to say Amen starkly illustrates his spiritual estrangement following the regicide. His realisation that he can't pray magnifies his distance from God and the divine order, marking the beginning of his eternal damnation. Don't forget, the belief was that a king was chosen by God, so by committing regicide, he has committed the ultimate sin. This quotation proves that the consequences are immediate and inescapable. Now, specifically, the idea that the word gets stuck in his throat is quite a visceral image. And by visceral, again, I mean you can almost feel it yourself. It's painful and it conjures images of coughing or choking, reflecting the pain he feels without his ability to seek God. This moment, reflective of the biblical principle that sin separates man from God, highlights the profound moral and spiritual consequences of Macbeth's actions. It's really clever again from Shakespeare, as it is a clear warning to a Jacobean audience following the gunpowder plot. Through this moment, he is making it clear to them that there are consequences when challenging the divine right of kings. It also acts as a sort of way of supporting King James too, by denouncing regicide and exposing the punishments that come with it. So this is Act 3, Scene 2, and Macbeth says, "O full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. Thou knowest that Banquo and his fiancé lives." So as a little context again, by this point Macbeth has decided to have Banquo and Fleance killed, as they are both a threat to his security as king. He thinks back to the witches, warning that Banquo shall get kings, and of course is very much aware that Banquo was there for the witches' predictions, and so will of course be suspicious of Macbeth's sudden ascension to the throne. In this particular moment, Macbeth speaks with Lady Macbeth, and it is clear how unstable and paranoid he is becoming. However, he does not reveal his intentions for Banquo and Fleance, revealing a clear restructure of power between the pair. He does, however, reveal the tumultuous state of his own psyche to his wife. The metaphor of his mind being full of scorpions magnifies the debilitating turmoil and lack of peace he is experiencing. So I love this quotation because there's actually so much that you could say about it too. Scorpions are venomous creatures and are of course very frightening creatures too. This image symbolises the toxic thoughts and the sting of guilt that plague Macbeth following Duncan's murder, and the prophecies regarding Banquo's descendants. Scorpions can also paralyse their prey, so Macbeth is metaphorically paralysed by paranoia and fear of losing what he has sacrificed so much for. His obsession with legacy has taken over his mind, and therefore in his own mind he needs to hear that Fleance and Banquo have been killed. And don't forget, he's still worried about Malcolm too. It ultimately never ends for him. He knew immediately after killing Duncan he would never find peace again, being unable to pray and hearing voices that he'll sleep no more. And these are both things that bring people peace. The consequences of regicide were there immediately, and now he is deeply trapped in it all. And finally, just one more way you could look at that idea of scorpions. In some ancient cultures, scorpions are associated with malevolent forces like the devil. Macbeth here could be admitting that he has allowed the devil inside of him. His mind is full of evil thoughts, therefore, and he is tortured by them. So overall, when he says this to Lady Macbeth, there's a desperate undertone to it. He seeks solace in sharing his burden with his wife, indicating the intimacy that once existed between them. However, this intimacy is now tainted by the dark deeds they have committed and the conspiracies they continue to weave. Next up, we've got this quote here: "I am in blood stepped in so far, but should I wade no more, returning or as tedious as go over." That's Act 3, Scene 4. In this scene, Macbeth and his wife host a banquet where many Scottish nobles are present. Interestingly, Macduff is not there, a sign of the growing opposition and suspicion against Macbeth. This comment comes at the end of the scene after he has already seen Banquo's ghost and acted suspiciously in front of his guests, who have by this point left. In this quotation, he acknowledges that he is so deeply entangled in his crimes that turning back is as difficult as continuing. This reflects his resignation to his violent path and the point of no return. This isn't the first time he's been aware that his actions will have inescapable consequences either. Quote number 3 is the perfect example of this, but the only difference here is that it's now too late for him to go back, whereas before he still had the opportunity to walk away from it all. Shakespeare's use of the declarative "I am in blood stepped in so far" exposes Macbeth's conscious awareness of the turmoil he has caused himself. The fact that Macbeth says he is in blood is literally an awareness of the blood that is being spilled because of him and his ambition. Symbolically, the fact that he is stepped in so far suggests that he is in a deep state of turmoil. When you add to this the verb wade, which is typically used when talking about moving through deep water, it again suggests that he is deep in trouble. This realisation reflects his entrapment in a cycle of violence of his own making, suggesting that his initial actions have led to unavoidable further crimes. He cannot go back to the Macbeth he was at the start, but he knows continuing will be catastrophic too. This next one, from this moment the very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand, is from Act 4, Scene 1. After hearing the witch's prophecies that have exploited his overconfidence, Macbeth resolves to act on his impulses without hesitation. This demonstrates his descent into tyranny and impulsive violence. He is unaware that the witch's words in this scene have been careful and cunning, designed to lull him into a false sense of security. Despite his overconfidence now, he still vows to murder Macduff and his family, without now thinking of the implications of this. In this quote, he simply means the very first things that he feels in his heart he will act on immediately. The phrase "from this moment" seems to indicate Macbeth is taking a stance. We already know he's aware that he's in blood stepped in so far that he can't go back. So this statement here makes it clear that he will absolutely only be proceeding with violence and violence only. Where previously he was aware of the trouble he had got himself into, the fact that he's saying from this moment indicates he's done with doubting himself. He's done with pondering. From this moment, he will not let emotion get in the way. And finally, you've got the repetition of firstlings, which reinforces this too, turning interior feelings into immediate physical action on the exterior. This is ultimately where him and Banquo differ too. Where Banquo was intrigued by the witches on the inside, he did not let his dark thoughts win. Whereas here, Macbeth is letting what goes on inside his head and his heart win. This is quotation number 9, and it says, "And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle," from Act 5, Scene 5. As we move into some quotations from Act 5, I thought this soliloquy was just too important to miss. So far in Act 5, Shakespeare reveals Lady Macbeth is severely mentally unwell. The army is advancing towards Dunsinane, and then in this particular scene, Macbeth has just been told his wife is dead. In this very famous soliloquy, Macbeth reflects on the futility and meaninglessness of life. It reveals his existential despair and the struggles with his power and ambition. Now, I chose this quotation because it's a famous soliloquy, and you can easily remember things like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and life's but a walking shadow. In this one, you've still got that very clear nihilism, which means that you see life as pointless. But you've also got biblical allusion too, which I think is really interesting to talk about, especially when Macbeth is now so estranged from God. So first of all, to be clear, he just literally means that all days just lead us to death. The phrase dusty death is firstly alliterative, and therefore harsh and stark, revealing the harsh reality of life ending in death, according to Macbeth now. The phrase conveys a sense of decay and impermanence, echoing the theme of transience and his feelings of nihilism that run throughout this soliloquy anyway. But then you've also got the biblical allusion to Ecclesiastes 3:20, where it says, "All go unto one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to dust again," which emphasises that we all live and we all die, ultimately reflecting the inescapable nature of death for all living beings. It's almost ironic that Macbeth's language connects to the Bible here, as he is undoubtedly damned in the eyes of a Jacobean audience after going against God by killing King Duncan. Could be a desperate attempt from Macbeth to seek approval from God, despite this being absolutely futile. Okay, so this is our final quote for this video, and it says, "Accursed be that tongue that tells me so, for it hath cowed my better part of man, and be these juggling fiends no more believed. I'll not fight with thee." And that's Act 5, Scene 8. So at this point, Macduff has found Macbeth. Don't forget he's desperate to be the one to kill Macbeth after what he did to his family. This scene is when they come face to face. The army has already taken control of Macbeth's castle, and Macbeth has already been fooled by the witches once. They told him that Macbeth shall never vanquished be until Burnham Wood to high Dunsinane Hill, which was a trick to make him think he'll not be harmed unless trees move up the hill towards his castle. He obviously doesn't think this is possible, but the army actually used branches as camouflage. So he's already realised he's been fooled once, and in this scene he still bizarrely believes that he is protected by the other witch's prophecy. This is the one where he's told none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. So here he comes face to face with Macduff, as I say, and again he feels protected because everyone is of woman born in his eyes. However, Macduff reveals he was born from a C-section. Now this is confusing because for us that's still being born from a woman, but Macduff, just before this dialogue you can see on the screen here, admits that he was untimely ripped from his mother's womb. This basically means that she had likely passed away during labour and so he was removed from her womb, which isn't considered a natural birth. Macbeth in this quotation that you can see realises he has been fooled and curses Macduff for revealing this to him because it has ruined his confidence. He says that the juggling fiends, or the witches in other words, are not to be trusted anymore. Then realising he has been completely fooled, he says he doesn't want to fight with Macduff. He actually does end up fighting though because he's just too hubristic to admit defeat, just so you know. So, to be honest, this is quite a long quotation. You can see I've cut bits out already with the brackets and the ellipsis. I think the best bits to remember are juggling fiends and I'll not fight with thee. The term juggling, just like an actual juggler, connotes skill, implying that the witch's prophecies are merely skillful illusions designed to lead Macbeth astray. And the word juggling can also be used to describe the ways that information can be presented in a way that gives a particular impression. We know this is true of Macbeth as he is given the prophecies in Act 4 Scene 1, and this gives him the illusion of security. They deliberately presented their information carefully and with cunning to exploit his hubris, and now he is aware of this. By also labelling them as fiends, Macbeth emphasises their malevolent nature and underscores his growing distrust and resentment towards them. This phrase could also be seen as a subtle warning to King James about the juggling fiends that had surrounded him, warning him to be wary of any more juggling plotters following the gunpowder plot itself. Macbeth also declares, "I'll not fight with thee," which marks a significant and almost pathetic shift in his character. In the face of his newfound vulnerability and despair, Macbeth abandons his earlier facade of bravery and fearlessness and decides to avoid a confrontation with Macduff. This refusal to fight symbolises Macbeth's resignation and defeat, as he now knows the futility of continuing to fight against his inevitable fate. Don't forget the witches also told him to beware Macduff, and now it is clear why. This moment essentially reflects his realisation that his once unshakable confidence and ambition have been undermined by the witch's deceit, leaving him powerless and defeated. In this video, we're going to look at 10 of the best quotations spoken by Lady Macbeth, just to give you a head start with your revision. I've tried to select ones that are a little more original than quotes such as "look like the innocent flower" and "take my milk for gone." There's nothing wrong with these, of course, but grade 9 answers tend to benefit from originality. Please watch the ways that I annotate these quotations and apply this skill to your annotations of other quotations that you like and others you already remember well. Essentially, like with my other quotation videos, I want to make it clear that these aren't the only ones that you can learn. You might have other quotations that you know you can say lots about. Just try to pick quotations that I feel are still brilliant to know, away from the well-known ones, because they're ones that you can still really pick apart. Now I'm going to explore them in chronological order so that you can see any developments in character as well. So first of all, we have this quotation from Act 1, Scene 5. And Lady Macbeth says, "I fear thy nature, it is too full of the milk of human kindness." Now this is spoken in Lady Macbeth's very first soliloquy. She reads the letter from Macbeth detailing his encounter with the witches and immediately reveals her ambition and determination as she immediately focuses on fulfilling the witch's prophecy. However, in this particular quotation, she recognises Macbeth's kindness will hold him back. She sees kindness as a flaw. The metaphor of milk is traditionally associated with nurturing and femininity, suggesting that Macbeth possesses traits that are antithetical to the ruthlessness required for usurping the throne. It's also interesting that she feels this way about him, since we have already heard of his merciless and seemingly natural talent for executing such brutal acts in the service of his king and country. If his actions here were supposedly feminine, according to Lady Macbeth, it demonstrates just how malevolent she believes he must become to commit regicide. It's also very telling on her part. The fact that she thinks he is too kind at present magnifies just how Machiavellian she is herself in comparison. By admitting that she is concerned by his kindness, it therefore reveals much of her own character. She is immediately presented by Shakespeare as a female character who actually lacks feminine qualities, or at the very least a character who doesn't value such traditional feminine qualities such as being gentle and nurturing. When linking this to the era and religion, the biblical instruction from 1 Timothy 2:12, "I suffer not a woman to teach nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence," implies clear boundaries for women, emphasising submission and prohibiting them from assuming positions of authority or instruction over men. This biblical notion is fitting of the general ideology of the Jacobean era too. It asserts that women should remain in a state of quietude, particularly in matters of teaching and authority, which were traditionally reserved for men. In stark contrast to this, Lady Macbeth in Act 1 Scene 5 of Macbeth exemplifies a woman who not only seeks to teach and influence her husband, but also aspires to usurp the conventional authority vested in male figures. Her sinful machinations and her manipulation of Macbeth to achieve her ends directly opposes the scripture that encourages women's silence and submissiveness. So overall, when we look at Lady Macbeth, Shakespeare seemingly deliberately presents her as a character to be wary or suspicious of. Now, if we look at this second quotation, it says, "Come, thick night, and pull thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes." And that's from Act 1, Scene 5. This quotation comes following the news that Macbeth is returning from battle. She expresses a desire to remain impervious to or unaffected by guilt when he returns, so that she can manipulate him and commit to the plot. Essentially, she doesn't want emotion getting in the way of securing the throne for Macbeth. In the soliloquy as a whole, you've got famous quotes like "unsex me here and take my milk for gall," and repeated imperative verbs as she calls upon spirits to assist her with malevolent requests. Specifically, in this quotation, Lady Macbeth calls upon the darkness to hide her actions, revealing her willingness to embrace evil and her desire to escape the moral consequences of her deeds. Now, I want to make it clear that when these quotations are quite lengthy, you don't need to memorise it word for word. A brilliant skill to practice is embedding bits you can remember into your explanations and your paragraphs. So, for example, perhaps you can't remember the middle section of this quotation, or you can only remember certain words. You might say, "Lady Macbeth demands thick night and smoke from hell to conceal her keen knife." It's always handy to revise images rather than full quotations, as you're much more likely to remember things this way, and it still gives you lots to analyse as well. Now, there's a couple of things you can pick apart in this quotation. Firstly, again, we have the imperative "come thick night," where the Jacobean audience witness Lady Macbeth summoning spirits and darkness, aligning her with fiendish forces. Nighttime and darkness are of course associated with evil, but also we need to consider the idea of concealment too. Whilst light and daytime are associated with truth, enlightenment and clarity, nighttime and darkness are associated with ambiguity and the concealment of truth. You might have people saying they are being kept in the dark when you aren't told something, or you don't understand something, for example. Then you have the word "pull," which means to cloak something. So Lady Macbeth is literally asking for the most dense smoke from hell itself to cloak the world so that her crimes will not be revealed. This will of course be to conceal it from those around the pair, but also God himself. Here she ironically shows desire to benefit from the darkness and malevolence of hell in order to escape judgment from God and the heavens. Don't forget, to commit regicide was to commit the ultimate sin, considering the belief in the divine right of kings. She is fully aware of the risk of damnation and naively believes she can hide from it. More interestingly still, the word "pull" is also a cloth spread over a coffin, foreshadowing the death of Duncan. Then there's the word "dunnest," which is a superlative adjective. She's asking for the smoke of a dull greyish-brown colour, and the fact she wants it to be the dunnest smoke of hell suggests she wants it to be dense, thick, and impossible to see clearly through it. Furthermore, considering the colour, this is literally dirty and filthy, metaphorical of the dirty and immoral act she intends to partake in. And then finally, you have the phrase "keen knife." She wants all of this darkness, smoke, and concealment so that nobody, not even heaven, can see them commit the deed. The adjective keen emphasises her enthusiasm to commit regicide, further exemplifying to the Jacobean audience the transgressive nature of her character. Okay, thirdly, we have the quotation, "When you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man." In this scene, Macbeth attempts to pull out of the murder. He has convinced himself that Duncan has honoured him of late and is a much-loved king. Lady Macbeth is furious with this, questioning his manhood, mocking him and manipulating him. You will know the famous quotation where she states that she would have dashed the brains out of a baby whilst breastfeeding, showing the lengths that she would go to avoid breaking a promise she had made to her husband. This is clever manipulation from her. This quotation here is equally as clever, challenging Macbeth and his masculinity. Essentially, she's saying that when Macbeth goes through with the act and gains the crown, then he will be a man. She implies, therefore, that status and position in society is what defines a man and makes a man. Her thoughts on masculinity directly oppose his, as he says, "I dare do all that may become a man, who dares do more is none." He's very aware here that overstepping boundaries that aren't his to claim weakens him as a man. To him, morality and loyalty define his masculinity at present. However, ultimately, Lady Macbeth knows that by patronising him in this way and challenging him to be even more of a man, he will succumb to this belief because it destroys his pride, especially having this come from a woman, and specifically his wife. The constant repetition of "you" here is direct and exemplifies Lady Macbeth's direct, strong and ruthless character. This, along with the repetition of "man," indicates an awareness of her husband's pride in his masculinity. Questioning it and reminding him of how much of a man he could be does prove successful, and of course we know it does work. Now there are two things we could say regarding intentions from Shakespeare here. On the one hand, perhaps he uses this dialogue to critique the rigid gender roles of the time, showing how Lady Macbeth manipulates and challenges these roles to achieve her ambitions. Her mention of masculinity as a measure of worth and power highlights the limitations placed on women in Jacobean society, perhaps inviting thoughtful reflection from the audience. However, and much more likely, I think, he's also revealing the destructive potential of unchecked ambition and the lengths to which Lady Macbeth will go to fulfil her desires. Shakespeare may be showing the dangers of affording women too much power, which aligns with James's belief that women were much more likely to be corrupted by the devil, and hence that's why women were more likely at risk of engaging in witchcraft. Ultimately, we know this play is about supporting King James. By showing women as a threat, Shakespeare shows support by appealing to James's interests and beliefs. Okay, quotation number 4. This one says, "Hark, peace, it was the owl that shrieked." And then we have, "Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it." And both of those are from Act 2, Scene 2. Now, the murder has been planned by this point and is underway, and Lady Macbeth, at the start of Act 2, Scene 2, awaits Macbeth's return from Duncan's chamber. Now, I wanted to show you this quotation because I think a lot of students end up thinking that Lady Macbeth just suddenly becomes weak and loses her sanity in Act 5, Scene 1. Maybe because of time constraints in your classes, I don't know. These two quotations here are from the same moment, just so you know, I've just broken it up a little bit. They're both from while she is waiting for Macbeth to return from the scene of the murder. I appreciate it's two quotations, but again, to make them easy to remember, you can simply reference them rather than remembering it word for word. So for example, you could say something like, "In Act 2, Scene 2, Lady Macbeth awaits Macbeth's return and is visibly panicked by every noise, such as an owl shrieking." This means you can still focus on Shakespeare's intentions by presenting her in such a way. You're still able to explore methods, so it's definitely worth just kind of slotting in words and embedding words and images rather than trying to learn full things, because it's a lot of pressure to do that. So anyway, the reason I've put these two quotations together is because there's actual glimmers of weakness much earlier on than sometimes some students notice. Her alarm at the owl's shriek betrays a flicker of vulnerability, hinting at the internal conflict and fear that underpins her facade of strength. She appears frightened by every sound, in fear that the plan will be uncovered should any single guest wake up. She is terrified of getting caught. I suppose the criticism we could make here is that many would be scared of getting caught, so she's not necessarily weak for feeling that. And don't forget, she still naively thinks that she will escape damnation too. So it's not remorse, it's nothing that will make her want to confess her sins. The emotion kind of simply stems from selfishness and self-preservation. However, Lady Macbeth's admission, had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it, reveals a moral boundary she is unwilling to cross. She is saying here that she had been unable to kill Duncan herself because he looks like her father whilst sleeping. Shakespeare exposes this moment of weakness and vulnerability and juxtaposes it with her earlier claim that she would dash out the brains of her child. This ultimately introduces a complex interplay between maternal instincts and respect or reverence to her father, suggesting that her capacity for violence is lessened somewhat by personal collection. This is a reflection of the strict societal expectations of women and the inherent contradictions within her character. Essentially, she is not as black and white as sometimes she is considered to be, and so I thought this was an interesting idea to consider, especially in terms of her strength and in terms of her almost unable to escape her femininity as well. This is quotation number 5, and it says, "A little water clears us of this deed," from Act 2, Scene 2. Now, despite the vulnerability we explored with the previous quotation, here, following Macbeth's return from the murder scene, Lady Macbeth must compose herself and ensure that Macbeth remains stable and calm to avoid detection and suspicion. Whether this is a facade following the glimmers of weakness before, or whether she is just simply able to compose herself to appear strong for Macbeth, it is not clear, but it's certainly something you can comment on. Now, in this conversation, you can see she grows impatient with Macbeth's remorse and panic. In this moment, she reminds him that the crime is easily concealed so long as they can wash the blood from their hands. Now, Shakespeare uses the word little here to almost make Lady Macbeth look naive. She attempts to trivialise and minimise the scale of what Macbeth has just done, and simplify the fact that they can easily hide what they've done. She essentially makes it sound easy. She also avoids the word murder, kill, or any other such phrase through the euphemism deed, which interestingly is what Macbeth does too in the run-up to the murder. We could analyse this in the sense that either she, like him, avoids the word to almost seek comfort and avoid accepting the magnitude of what they're doing, or she's just doing it to just ensure that he remains calm. Perhaps she feels it's unhelpful in that moment to use such straightforward language when she knows he's already so frantic. Finally, what Lady Macbeth appears to forget here is that whilst it might be easy to wash blood away in a literal sense, the metaphorical stain of what they have done in the form of guilt or damnation is impossible to avoid or remove. This is where her naivety costs her, as later in the play, we know she shouts at her own hands, "Out damn spot," indicating that this guilt was inescapable. So we're skipping forward to Act 3, Scene 2 for quote number 6. This one says, "Naught's had, all's spent, where our desire is got without content." By this point, Macbeth has planned to have Banquo and Fleance killed, and hasn't made Lady Macbeth aware of his plans. In this scene, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth express their unhappiness, and the audience are made aware of the psychological turmoil that they are both experiencing as a consequence of regicide. Here, specifically, Lady Macbeth reflects on the futility of their actions, acknowledging that achieving their ambitions has not brought them the satisfaction they expected, hinting at her growing inner turmoil. She is literally saying we have nothing despite all the effort. What we desired and what we got hasn't brought us contentment or happiness. So again, this is another example of Lady Macbeth's private turmoil, as she says this alone on stage. She continues to maintain a facade in front of Macbeth, but there are clues to the audience everywhere that she is struggling. The juxtaposition of naught and all creates a profound irony. They have given their all, but in return they have nothing of value. This highlights the ultimate futility or pointlessness, in other words, of their actions. The juxtaposition reflects the extreme disparity between their expectations and the reality. It's literally a case of giving their all for absolutely nothing. And then you've got the word spent. This word denotes exhaustion and depletion. It indicates that they have expended all their resources, both physical and moral, to achieve their goals. This sense of depletion, or emptiness, in other words, here, is not just material, but also psychological and emotional. As always, Shakespeare warns of the consequences of transgressing the great chain of being. They are not fulfilled in any way and are really starting to feel it. Now, one more thing I will say about this scene is that Macbeth obviously deliberately makes sure that Lady Macbeth is innocent of the knowledge of the murders of Banquo and Fleance. He doesn't need to confide in her or seek her for support or motivation. So this only adds to her feelings of nothingness. Without the feeling of being needed by him, she essentially withers away into nothing. She has no purpose. Don't forget, we've seen little signs of struggle already, but she pulls herself together in front of Macbeth to support him and his position. But now that he doesn't need her, she serves no purpose and is ultimately left to her own devices. We see her one more time at the banquet before seeing her in Act 5, Scene 1 when she is mentally unwell. So this quotation here, number 7, says, "Are you a man?" and it's from Act 3, Scene 4. Now, as I said before, this is the last time we see her before Act 5, Scene 1 when we come across the fact that she is mentally unwell. Now, in this scene, Macbeth sees Banquo's ghosts and rouses suspicion and concern amongst his guests. Lady Macbeth actually attempts to cover for him, explaining that his hallucinations are nothing to those that know him and are actually quite regular. When we think of the pair comparatively, Lady Macbeth has consistently been better at maintaining calm in tense and frantic situations, where Macbeth struggles with immediate panic, and this time it's public. Her private reprimand, "Are you a man?" mirrors her earlier attempts at emasculation in Act 1, challenging his masculinity to spur him into action. Yet here it underscores her frustration with his inability to manage his guilt and visions. It's almost as if she uses it as a tactic after seeing its success last time. It seems to be a last-ditch effort at maintaining authority and power. However, his response this time is different. He doesn't let her manipulate him and takes pride in his newfound belief of what masculinity looks like, saying he is a bold one who might appall the devil. So essentially he's saying he is a bold man who would terrify the devil. At this point, it reflects the loss of control and the change in power dynamics between the pair. This is ultimately where we see her loss of worth. Ultimately, by destroying his kindness and the sense of morality he once had, she has destroyed her own sense of purpose too. He simply does not need her anymore as he becomes increasingly distant from what it means to be human. Quotation number 8 is Act 5, Scene 1. And she says hell is murky. In this scene, Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking and is completely unaware that she is confessing her sins before the doctor and gentlewoman. They observe her and try to diagnose the problem, and the doctor says she needs divine help. In other words, she is beyond mortal help. As she sleepwalks, she says hell is murky, which illustrates the internalisation of her damnation, suggesting a psychological and emotional self-exile to a hellish state of mind. In other words, it's like she has sent herself to hell. Her reference to it being murky evokes a visual and moral obscurity, as this word means dark and gloomy, and is usually if you're talking about fog or mist. It suggests her clouded judgment and tormented conscience. If we think back to earlier, she asked for the dunnest smoke of hell, and now is completely submerged into a hellish state. Furthermore, the statement is declarative, meaning she is stating a fact, emphasised by the word is, suggesting she firmly believes she is already there in hell and seeing it firsthand. The audience sees the consequences of her naive demands earlier, where she sought the support of spirits and darkness. Now she has what she requested and is suffering for it. Again, quotation number 9 is her in her sleepwalking scene in Act 5, Scene 1. Lady Macbeth's guilt manifests vividly as she tries to wash away the imaginary bloodstains, symbolising her deep-seated remorse and mental breakdown. The repetition of the imperative out emphasises Lady Macbeth's desperate attempt to exert control over her situation. She is commanding the imaginary bloodstain to disappear. Unlike her earlier confident commands, this one reveals her growing desperation and loss of control. Lady Macbeth's language in Act 1, Scene 5 is powerful and assertive. She invokes supernatural forces with phrases like "come you spirits" and "come thick night" to aid her in her plans. Here though, the command to out damn Spot reveals a stark contrast. Her earlier control and command over supernatural elements have deteriorated into a futile attempt to command her own mind and conscience. She also previously sought the supernatural to conceal her crimes, and now she is asking those same spirits to rid her of her suffering. When looking at the word damned, this word carries strong connotations of curses and damnation, highlighting the severity of her guilt and the belief that her soul is damned for her part in Duncan's murder. And then you've got the word spot. The bloodstain is symbolic of her guilt and complicity in the murders. It's a persistent reminder of the crime that haunts her conscience. Whilst what she is seeing is simply a spot of blood, it is symbolic of something much larger. What she previously thought would be removed by a little water is still staining her. And then finally, Act 1 Scene 5 and Act 5 Scene 1 show her relationship with the supernatural. Initially, she seeks to harness its power, but ultimately the supernatural manifests as a tormenting force that she cannot control. Quotation number 10, the last one. Here's the smell of blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand, from Act 5 Scene 1. This quotation highlights Lady Macbeth's overwhelming guilt and the inescapable nature of her conscience, as she realises that no external remedy can cleanse her of her sins. The quotation powerfully captures the irreversible and deeply personal nature of Lady Macbeth's guilt. Despite earlier attempts to dismiss their actions, Lady Macbeth now fully acknowledges the profound and lasting impact of their deeds, reflecting Shakespeare's exploration of guilt, conscience, and the psychological consequences of ambition and moral transgression. The reference to all the perfumes of Arabia evokes a rich, exotic image. Arabian perfumes were known for their strong, sweet, and luxurious scents, symbolising an attempt to cover or cleanse something foul. These perfumes should be strong enough to overpower any foul smell, so the fact they fail to sweeten her hand reflects the depth of her psychological torment. It indicates that her guilt is so profound that even the most potent and powerful remedies cannot help her suffering. Also, the fact that she refers to her hand as a little hand symbolises Lady Macbeth's individual responsibility and her human vulnerability. She's trying to make herself seem fragile almost and delicate, which completely contrasts the perception the Jacobean audience will have by this point in the play. It also exemplifies the fact that what the pair have done far outweighs them as humans. It reminds the audience that beneath her ruthless exterior, she is just a human being, susceptible to the same fears, regrets, and moral consequences as anyone else. It serves as a poignant metaphor for the disparity between the vastness of her crime, regicide, and her own smallness and inability to mitigate its consequences. It highlights the tragic irony of how someone so small could commit acts with such monumental consequences. In this video, we're going to look at 5 of the best quotations spoken by Banquo in the play Macbeth. I've tried to select quotations from him that I feel reveal a lot about his character and connections to King James, ones that show him to be a foil to Macbeth, and ones that ultimately connect to themes as well. As I always say, try to also apply the skill of annotating these quotations to your annotations of others you like and others you already remember well, because don't forget these aren't the only quotations that you can use. There's a whole play full of dialogue to choose from. I've just tried to select juicy ones that connect to lots of different ideas and themes to help you with questions that you might receive. So number 1 is a quotation from Act 1 Scene 3, and it says, "The instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence." Now in this scene, Macbeth and Banquo have just been given prophecies from the witches. Whilst Banquo does show intrigue briefly in this scene, he clearly warns Macbeth here to be cautious and believe the witches are trying to win them over through these exciting offerings. However, he is aware that the witches are using these to betray them, which will ultimately lead to terrible consequences. So firstly, Banquo's cautionary words reveal his scepticism about the witches' prophecies, showcasing his wisdom and discerning nature. However, there is evidence of intrigue from Banquo in this scene as well. Firstly, he asks the witches for a prediction of his own when he hears Macbeth's prophecies, and then also when Ross and Angus come to tell Macbeth he is the new Thane of Cawdor, they see the first prophecy from Macbeth come to fruition almost immediately. Banquo says, "Can the devil speak true?" which shows his dismay that their words do seem to hold truth. However, here he recognises the danger of trusting such devilish forces. For example, the phrase instruments of darkness metaphorically describes the witches as tools of evil, emphasising Banquo's understanding of the supernatural as potentially malevolent. Don't forget, an instrument is something that is used and played by someone with lots of skill, implying that the witches are merely puppets for something much more skillful and evil, like the devil. This analysis is fitting, as Jacobeans believed that witches were associated with the devil. Now, as an extra little fact, King James was extremely interested in witchcraft and wrote a book called Demonology. In it, he believed that women were more likely to be witches because women were more likely to be corrupted by the devil, citing Eve from Genesis in the Bible as evidence of this. Banquo does notice that the witches appear somewhat feminine, so this potentially appeals to the interests and beliefs of King James. Not only that, but a real-life Banquo was thought to be an ancestor of King James, so presenting his character as perceptive and wise to the dangers of the supernatural ultimately serves as a compliment to King James himself. Now, with the next phrase, honest trifles, we know obviously to be honest means to be truthful, and the word trifles means something small and insignificant. So here it highlights how small truths can be used to manipulate and deceive, foreshadowing how Macbeth will be led astray by seemingly positive prophecies. It's also quite interesting that he uses the word trifles to describe the prophecies they are given. He's describing them as small and insignificant, but they are quite literally potentially life-changing prophecies as well. Perhaps he's being careful with his words, deliberately to downplay the witch's words, as he is aware of Macbeth's ambition. He's seen Macbeth's kind of shocked reaction to the prophecies, so he maybe has to kind of play them down to protect his friend. Ultimately, though, Banquo's caution contrasts with Macbeth's immediate acceptance of the witch's words, setting up a moral dichotomy between the two characters. And a dichotomy is a contrast between two opposites, and here their reactions are clearly very different. Next up, we have quotation from Act 2, Scene 1, and the quotation is, "A heavy summons lies like lead upon me. Merciful powers restrain in me the cursed thoughts." And Banquo here is talking to his son Fleance and admits he has been struggling to sleep. It's clear the witch's words have affected him, and so he actually prays for mercy and to be able to rid himself of the cursed thoughts he is having. I think a lot of people truly believe he isn't at all affected by the witch's words, whereas Macbeth is. And I think that would be overly simple to say it like that. In fact, he is affected, and this quotation is a good example of how. So you've got some real obvious inner conflict there. Banquo's struggle with cursed thoughts indicates his internal battle against the temptations and dark desires the witches have stirred within him. However, the fact he calls them cursed thoughts shows recognition of the evil that could arise from him letting it take hold. Now you have that phrase heavy summons as well. This metaphor conveys the weight of his cursed thoughts. He is literally weighed down by the fiendish work of the witches, and he hates that they have affected him like this. This phrase also reflects the sense of foreboding he feels, reflecting the play's pervasive atmosphere of unease all the way through. Don't forget, this is the scene right before the murder. There is a sense everywhere that something is afoot, and perhaps this is even another explanation for the way he feels. Perhaps it is in fact a divine warning that he misses. It almost creates a sense of irony for the audience, as he also notes that there is husbandry in heaven, which implies there is movement in heaven, perhaps to make space for Duncan. For the audience, the dramatic irony lies in the fact that we know what is coming, but he doesn't recognise these signs. He also appeals to merciful powers to restrain his thoughts, which contrasts with Macbeth's willing surrender to his ambitions, underscoring Banquo's moral integrity. He recognises right from wrong, even when his morality is clearly, he feels, being tested. Now it's interesting overall because if you're talking about Banquo as a foil to Macbeth, this quote highlights Banquo's humanity and susceptibility to the same dark impulses that drive Macbeth, making his resistance against them even more commendable. Ultimately, Macbeth and Banquo do contrast each other, but not in the way that many seem to oversimplify it. It's not as simple as Macbeth listens to the witches and Banquo doesn't. or Macbeth is affected and Banquo isn't. In fact, the contrast comes from the fact that ultimately Macbeth yields to their corruption, allowing their words to take hold of him, whereas Banquo here begs to be rid of the dark thoughts. He is desperate to reject them as he recognises their danger. That doesn't mean they aren't there. Now, this is interesting in the sense that Jacobeans believe the devil could operate inside your mind. So if you have a dark thought, it was believed the devil was there. Now, of course, you can choose to reject this darkness like Banquo or accept it like Macbeth. This is where they differ so much. So overall, with this quote, you can contrast the pair. You can explore morality versus immorality. You can explore the power of the supernatural on even the most moral characters, and you can explore loyalty too. Quotation 3 is from Act 2, Scene 1, and it says, "So I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchised and allegiance clear. I shall be counselled." This quotation actually comes almost immediately after the previous one. Macbeth spots Banquo and Fleance, and knowing himself what he is about to do, seems to want to bribe Banquo into loyalty. Macbeth essentially says if Banquo remains loyal, it will make honour for him, meaning he will potentially reward him with some form of title or wealth if the prophecies come true. Macbeth has to be vague because he doesn't want to create suspicion. Banquo doesn't recognise that Macbeth is doing this because he's trying to ensure he has people safely on his side and loyal to him following the murder. So Banquo replies with this, as you can see here. He essentially means, if I don't lose my integrity and morality by siding with you, and as long as I can keep my conscience clear, I will stay by your side. He says, "So I lose none in seeking to augment it." Augment here just means increasing something or making it bigger. So this just means so long as I don't lose my integrity in trying to increase my success. And then he obviously goes on to say, if I can keep my conscience clear, then I will stand with you. Now, the word bosom means chest, and franchised here means free or unrestricted. Banquo wants to keep his heart and conscience free, and his heart unburdened by guilt. This, of course, opposes the black and deep desires that plague Macbeth's heart and conscience by this point. Macbeth holds on to these thoughts whilst Banquo, as we saw in the previous quote, wants rid of them. Then we have the word clear, of course, denoting Banquo's understanding that he wants a clear conscience. This is metaphorical of the moral clarity Banquo has in comparison to Macbeth. Now, ultimately, again, we see Banquo as a foil to Macbeth. Macbeth here almost attempts to bribe his nearest and dearest. He knows Banquo is the only one that could be suspicious of him when Duncan is conveniently murdered just after the witches told Macbeth he would be king. Macbeth uses deceit and cunning to protect himself, ultimately accepting the immorality within him and allowing it to take hold, whereas Banquo is noble and rejects immorality in favour of loyalty and honour. Now this is quotation number 4 from Act 2, Scene 3. "In the great hand of God I stand, and thence against the undivulged pretence I fight of treasonous malice." So this is one from just after the murder, specifically Duncan's murder, and his body has just been discovered. Banquo, along with others, is shocked and outraged by the king's brutal assassination. Here, Banquo asserts his position and his intentions moving forward. Banquo just means that with God's assistance, he will fight against the deceit and treason he has witnessed. So there are really strong themes again of loyalty and honour. Banquo's declaration of his intent to fight against treason shows his unwavering loyalty to King Duncan and respect for the divine order. Amongst all of the sadness of losing such a virtuous king, he is determined to fight back against whoever did it. Firstly, let's look at Banquo's alignment with his faith. The phrase "great hand of God" signifies Banquo's awareness of divine authority and protection. Banquo is invoking God's power and justice. He aligns himself with good rather than the evil thoughts that have troubled him previously. Then the fact that he says "I stand" suggests Banquo declares his position, aligning himself with divine justice and morality again. This determined stance indicates his sense of righteousness and his commitment to truth and justice. He vows to remain true to his faith and morality. The phrase "undivulged pretense" suggests deliberate hidden motives and deceit, capturing the play's theme of appearance versus reality. He already seems to be aware that someone around him is hiding something, as a pretense is behaviour that deliberately deceives people. The phrase "I fight" suggests Banquo is committing to taking action against this hidden treachery. His fight is not just physical, but also moral and spiritual. His actions are also prompted by his alignment with God. It's almost as if he's doing it on behalf of God. Don't forget, the king was chosen by God, so by fighting for the divine order, Banquo shows his belief in it. Next, we have the phrase treasonous malice, which explicitly identifies the nature of the crime. Treason against the king driven by malevolent intentions. The sibilance within this phrase conveys Banquo's disgust, almost as though he spits the words out. He is horrified that anyone could do this and sees it as nothing short of evil and malicious. Not only that, but Banquo's words indicate his direct opposition to the malicious treachery that has led to Duncan's murder. He is positioning himself against the forces of evil and treason. Now finally, one more thing I would say is that Banquo's determination is naive. His determination to combat treason foreshadows his own fate, as his integrity makes him a target for Macbeth's paranoia. The statement reinforces Banquo's role as a foil to Macbeth, highlighting his commitment to justice and truth in the face of corruption and betrayal. And finally, we have a quotation from Act 3, Scene 1. Now, this quotation comes at the very start of Act 3. This is from Banquo's soliloquy, where he airs his concerns about Macbeth's sudden ascension to the throne. He says, "Thou hast it now, King, Cawdor, Glamis, all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playedst most foully for it." In this soliloquy, he confirms his suspicions arise from Macbeth's convenient rise to power since the witch's predictions. He also wonders whether the witch's words will prove truthful for him too. So there is still a suggestion that their words have affected him. However, once again, he doesn't act on these impulses, whereas Macbeth, of course, does. So in this particular quotation, he essentially says, "You have it now, the title of King, Thane of Cawdor, and Thane of Glamis, just like the witches promised, and I'm worried that you have committed evil deeds to gain these titles." Banquo's suspicion that Macbeth has achieved his titles through foul play reveals his perceptiveness and intuitive understanding of Macbeth's character. The phrase "played most foully" really captures the deceit and treachery that Banquo suspects, reflecting the corrupting influence of unchecked ambition. Now, the word "foully" denotes dirt and filth, suggesting the vile ways that Macbeth may have gone about gaining his new titles. This word also echoes the witch's incantation, "Fair is foul and foul is fair," casting a shadow over Macbeth's kingship. This choice of language not only aligns with the play's theme of moral inversion, but also seems to suggest that Banquo is aware that Macbeth may have resorted to dark deeds to fulfil the prophecies himself. The language of the witches keeps appearing, and it is clear that their presence has been transformative and their power is inescapable. This undoubtedly encourages fear from the Jacobean audience. Furthermore, the word "playdist" functions metaphorically to describe Macbeth's actions as a part of a larger, deceitful game, rather than honest. It connotes skill in doing so. There is also an element of irony in the use of this word, as it contrasts the idea of play, which is often associated with innocence and light-heartedness, with the grave and sinister actions Macbeth has undertaken. Finally, the idea of playing also ties into the theme of appearance versus reality. Macbeth is currently playing the role of a noble and innocent king, hiding his true deeds behind a facade of loyalty and honour. So overall, to look at the quote as a whole, Banquo's insight into Macbeth's actions stands in stark contrast to his own fate, as he remains unaware of the danger he himself is in. His suspicions set the stage for the tension between him and Macbeth, foreshadowing his murder as Macbeth seeks to secure his power and eliminate perceived threats. In this video, we're going to look at 5 of the best quotations spoken by Macduff in the play Macbeth. As always, I like to select more original quotations so that you can stand out a little bit compared to the really popular ones. That's obviously not to say popular ones aren't good too. The reason they're popular is because they're so juicy in terms of analysis. I've just tried to select ones that you can still really pick apart, but they're less known generally. Now, importantly for Macduff, it's worth looking into his character in case you get a question on anything such as masculinity, loyalty, or morality, because he essentially contrasts Macbeth in all of these. Shakespeare deliberately makes characters like Macduff and Banquo look so noble, and this only serves to make Macbeth look even worse, so you definitely can and should get to know them well. So firstly, we have a quotation from Act 2, Scene 3, and it says, "Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple and stole thence the life of the building." Now, this is from Act 2, Scene 3, so it seems like I've jumped quite far into the play. But Act 2, Scene 3 is actually the first time Macduff speaks in the play. He is present in Act 1, Scene 6 as King Duncan and the noblemen arrive to Macbeth's castle, but his first words only come in this scene. This scene is immediately after the murder, and he initially talks with the porter. Macduff is actually the character that discovers Duncan's body. He is initially speechless and can't even bring himself to articulate what he has seen. He encourages the others to go and see for themselves, and when he manages to speak, he says this. Now, firstly, the word sacrilegious means disrespecting something or violating something sacred or holy. So here he says the murder of a king is a violation of what is sacred or holy. The murderer has essentially invaded the Lord's temple, in other words, Duncan himself, and taken his life. So let's have a closer look. Firstly, the fact he calls it a most sacrilegious murder is interesting. The superlative most emphasises the unparalleled sinfulness of the act. It's not just a sacrilegious act, but it's the most sacrilegious, suggesting an unparalleled violation. And the word sacrilegious, the term implies a profound violation of the sacred or holy, emphasising the sanctity of Duncan's kingship and the horror of the act against a divinely appointed ruler. Now, when I say sanctity, I just mean something holy again. So Duncan being appointed by God as a ruler on earth is holy. Then you have the violent imagery of Duncan's body being broke open. This conveys a sense of violent intrusion and desecration. It suggests that the murder was not only brutal, but also a forceful violation of sanctity. To be clear, Duncan's body is the temple here. Of course, this is a metaphor, and it signifies that he is a divinely chosen king, anointed by God. This reflects the belief in the divine right of kings, where the king is considered God's representative on earth. This metaphor, or this religious imagery as a whole, elevates Duncan's murder to a level of blasphemy. It portrays the act as not just a crime against a human, but a crime against God himself. It shows Macduff's alignment with this belief, and therefore acts as an important reminder to the audience too. To go even further, the building specifically represents Duncan's body, and the life that has been stolen is his soul. The murder is described as theft, with life being stolen from the sacred body. The juxtaposition of life and death ultimately highlights the stark transition from life to death, from sanctity to desecration, emphasising the gravity and irreversible nature of the act. So overall, if we are thinking about Macduff's character here, his reaction highlights his deep respect for the natural and divine order. His horror at the murder reflects his integrity and loyalty to the rightful king. And if contrasting to Macbeth, the reverence or respect Macduff shows for Duncan's sacred kingship contrasts sharply with Macbeth's ambition and moral corruption. While Macbeth sees Duncan's kingship as a barrier to his power, Macduff sees it as divinely sanctioned and something that should not be violated. Next up, for number 2, we've got a quotation from Act 4, Scene 3, and it says, "Bleed, bleed, poor country, great tyranny, lay thou thy basest shore, for goodness dare not check thee." Now, this quotation is spoken by Macduff during his conversation with Malcolm in Act 4, Scene 3. Malcolm is Duncan's son, the Prince of Cumberland. Macduff has actually followed Malcolm to England in the hope of overthrowing Macbeth. They are discussing the dire state of Scotland under Macbeth's tyrannical rule. Macduff laments the suffering of his homeland and expresses his despair over the seemingly unchallenged tyranny of Macbeth. He is expressing great sadness at the state of Scotland and essentially states that Macbeth, the tyrant, will sadly be able to continue to rule without worry because good people aren't going to deal with him or try to stop him. So in this quotation, you of course have the repetition of the word bleed, and that emphasises the ongoing suffering and trauma that Scotland is enduring under Macbeth's rule. The exclamation conveys Macduff's intense emotional pain and sorrow for his country, and by addressing the country as if it were a wounded person, Shakespeare personifies Scotland. This highlights the depth of the nation's suffering and the extent of the damage inflicted by Macbeth's tyranny. It also exposes Macduff's patriotism. He cares for the whole nation, whilst Macbeth desperately protects himself and his position only. When Macduff asks for great tyranny to lay thou thy basis sure, he implies that tyranny can freely entrench itself because there is no force of goodness strong enough to challenge it. This is what is most devastating for Macduff. There is nobody to challenge Macbeth's tyranny, and so the country continues to bleed dry until there is nothing left. The stark contrast between goodness and tyranny emphasises the moral decay and cowardice in Scotland. Goodness is depicted as powerless and afraid, unable to confront or oppose the overwhelming force of evil. This criticism of others and their unwillingness to fight for morality suggests Macduff would fight for his country, portraying him as brave, willing and loyal. Now again, if you wanted to talk about this quotation, you've got the contrasts with Macbeth again, you have morality versus immorality, you have loyalty, and you have masculinity too. For quotation number 3, we have one from Act 4, Scene 3 again, and Macduff says, "I shall do so, but I must also feel it as a man." Now in this moment, Malcolm has realised by now that he can trust Macduff, and they are planning on working together and rounding up armies in both England and Scotland to defeat Macbeth. Ross arrives with the devastating news of Macduff's family's deaths. Malcolm encourages Macduff to dispute it like a man, which is immediately juxtaposed with Macduff's insistence on feeling his grief as a man. This highlights a nuanced understanding of masculinity, emphasising emotional integrity over cold vengeance. So what I mean by this is that when Macduff insists that he must feel it as a man, he actually understands the depth of his emotional response and finds it important to experience and process his grief. This suggests he recognises the complexity of masculinity. He understands that masculine strength is not solely defined by aggression, but also by the ability to confront and express his emotions. So if we look a little closer, with the phrase "I shall do so," there is a sense of determination and resolution. This part of the quotation reflects Macduff's resolve to take action against Macbeth. He acknowledges Malcolm's advice and indicates his willingness to channel his grief into action. And then of course he goes on to say, "But I must also feel it as a man." The word "but" introduces a contrast to Malcolm's suggestion, highlighting Macduff's need to express his grief fully before seeking revenge. He is happy to subvert the expectations of the rightful King Malcolm in the name of what he thinks is right. The phrase "feel it as a man" underscores Macduff's recognition of his own humanity. Unlike Macbeth, who often suppresses his emotions in pursuit of power, Macduff embraces his need to grieve. This highlights a key difference between the two characters: Macduff's moral integrity and emotional depth versus Macbeth's ruthless ambition. The word "man" is also significant here. In the context of the play, masculinity is often associated with aggression. However, Macduff redefines what it means to be a man by acknowledging that true manhood involves the capacity to feel and express deep emotions. This challenges the traditional notion of masculinity in the Jacobean era, suggesting that strength also lies in vulnerability and emotional honesty. By acknowledging his need to grieve, Macduff is humanised and portrayed as a passionate and balanced character, capable of both strength and vulnerability. To contrast him with Macbeth, consider Lady Macbeth's challenge to Macbeth's masculinity in Act 3, Scene 4. Macbeth's pride in his new understanding of masculinity is evident when he declares himself a bold one who would appall the devil. This hubris highlights his misguided view of masculinity, which is closely tied to power, dominance, and instilling fear, even in supernatural beings like the devil. This perspective aligns with his readiness to use violence and manipulation to assert his authority and maintain control. In contrast, Macduff's response to his family's murder reveals a different concept of masculinity, one marked by empathy, vulnerability, and a sense of responsibility. Instead of finding satisfaction in displays of strength or intimidation, Macduff confronts his grief and seeks justice for his loved ones, showing a deeper emotional intelligence. Thus, the contrast between Macbeth's notion of masculinity and Macduff's more thoughtful and compassionate response highlights the different paths of these two characters and serves as a commentary on the complex nature of masculinity in the play. Therefore, this quotation is great for themes of masculinity, morality, and contrasting Macbeth's character. On to quotation number 4 from Act 5, Scene 7. And this one says, "Tyrant, show thy face. If thou beest slain and with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghosts will haunt me still." By this point, Macduff desperately seeks Macbeth. He is adamant that he must be the one to kill him, and here even sees it as a sense of duty for his family. He's referring to Macbeth as a tyrant here, and states that if he is being killed by someone else's sword, he will be haunted by his wife and children's ghosts. Firstly, the imperative "show thy face" is a direct and forceful demand. It conveys his determination to confront Macbeth personally. There is a sense of fearlessness here, epitomising the sense of masculinity Shakespeare encourages amongst his audience, a man that defeats evil and combats tyranny, rather than a man who believes masculinity stems from undeserving power. Furthermore, this term has been used numerous times by this point. The term tyrant is loaded with connotations of oppressive and illegitimate rule. It signifies Macbeth's fall from a once noble warrior to a despised traitor. This word alone encapsulates the contempt and hatred Macduff has for Macbeth. There is no respect for the king here at all. Furthermore, there is a sense of personal justice. The idea that Macduff must be the one to strike Macbeth highlights the personal nature of his quest. It's not enough for Macbeth to die. Macduff feels he must be the agent of this. And this is because of his family. My wife and children's ghosts will haunt me still is the bit we're going to look at next. The mention of ghosts haunting him evokes a sense of relentlessness, inescapable guilt and torment. It suggests that Macduff's need for revenge is deeply tied to his sense of duty to his murdered family. The word haunt implies that he will never find peace unless he avenges his family's murder, and neither will they. He owes it to them, and there is a sense of guilt there. Whilst Macbeth is haunted by the guilt of his immoral acts, Macduff is haunted by a sense of duty towards his family, all stemming from his strong sense of morality. This phrase in particular underscores the emotional burden Macduff carries. It implies that his sense of justice and duty to his family transcends even the act of killing Macbeth. It is about restoring moral balance and finding personal peace, once again portraying a much more moral view of what it means to be a man. And once again, for this quotation, there are themes of morality and masculinity, and then supernatural and guilt as well. Finally, we have Act 5, Scene 8 for number 5, and this one says, "Turn, hellhound, turn." This is the moment Macduff comes face to face with Macbeth. It's pretty self-explanatory. He refers to Macbeth as a hellhound, so we can have a close look at that. So firstly, the word turn is an imperative command, signalling Macduff's authority and determination. It shows his resolve and readiness to confront Macbeth directly, demanding his attention and a face-to-face battle. The term hellhound is a powerful metaphor that compares Macbeth to a demonic dog from hell. This comparison is significant for several reasons. The word hell associates Macbeth with evil, the supernatural and damnation, underscoring his moral corruption and the consequence of his heinous actions. Then you have the animalistic imagery with the word hound. Macduff dehumanises Macbeth, reducing him to a beast driven by primal instincts. It suggests savagery and a lack of human morality or conscience, fitting for someone who has committed regicide and numerous other murders at this point. Furthermore, in mythology, hounds are often seen as guardians of the underworld, highlighting Macbeth's role as a guardian of chaos and tyranny in Scotland and his connections to hell. Earlier in the play, Macbeth is hailed with noble titles such as Brave Macbeth and Valor's Minion. The shift to being called a hellhound marks a complete reversal of his character arc, from hero to villain. All of these terms are terms that others have used to refer to Macbeth, reflecting the change in opinions amongst his nobles. Now, just generally, the intensity of the language reflects Macduff's righteous anger and moral clarity. Unlike Macbeth, who is shrouded in moral ambiguity and guilt, Macduff's cause is just and clear. He seeks vengeance for the brutal murder of his family and the restoration of Scotland. It's a typical case of good versus evil. Macduff represents justice, honour and retribution, while Macbeth embodies tyranny, corruption and malevolence. The confrontation between Macduff and Macbeth thus becomes not just a personal vendetta, but a symbolic battle for the soul of Scotland.